And Juno, I will turn it over to you. She got bumped. She's coming back in. Hold on. Juno, are you back yet?
Yes, I believe I'm back.
You just got bumped. Okay, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. So if we're done, everybody letting trickle in, I want to welcome everybody to our twice yearly stakeholder meeting. Just some quick info. These meetings are designed to get input from community members on different topics related to homelessness. And today we'll be hearing specifically from and giving feedback to the county's Department of Conservation and Development about particular funding sources, and then talk about some new equity work we're starting in our homeless continuum of care. We are pretty limited on time today. So, oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Juno. I'm the chair of the Council on Homelessness and also a Youth Action Council member. We are limited on time, however, today though, so we encourage you to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name, your preferred pronouns, and however you want to identify yourself as connected to homelessness, an agency, or your where you live, etc.
Thank you, Juno. With that, I think we can hand it over to you, Kristen, and let me know if you cannot share, but you should be able to.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning. I clearly still think it's Monday morning. Anyway, it's Monday. Let me share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Everyone see that?
Yep, we're good.
Awesome. Okay, so today, like I said, my name is Kristen Shirk. I work for Contra Costa County in the Department of Conservation and Development. And I am here today to talk about a one-time through the American Rescue Plan HOME-ARP funds, so quickly go through sort of my agenda, give a short presentation on what the HOME-ARP funds are. I have a series of survey questions that I will go through with you all today via the Poll Everywhere website, and then leave some time for Q&A at the end. And I think I have allocated about an hour today, so go ahead and get started. So the allocation of HOME-ARP funds, the total award of funds was just over $12 million, and approximately or up to 15% is allowed for program administration, which leaves the $10.276 million available for activities. The funds must be spent by 2030, and the funds are eligible to be used for projects anywhere in the county, unincorporated or any of the cities. Like I said, they're from the American Rescue Plan to provide assistance to individuals or households who are homeless, at risk of homelessness, and other vulnerable populations to reduce homelessness and increase housing stability. The 4 eligible activities are preservation and production of affordable rental housing, tenant-based rental assistance, Tbra for short, housing-related supportive services, which include McKinney-Vento eligible services, homeless prevention, and housing counseling services. And the last one is acquisition and development of non-congregate shelters, or NCS for short. The qualifying populations to include, our funds must primarily benefit eligible populations, which include a household or family who is homeless, at risk of homelessness, and both of those are the same definitions as the McKinney Act definitions. Fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual violence, stalking, or human trafficking, And those definitions are from the VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act regulations. Other populations where assistance would prevent homelessness or serve those with greatest risk of housing instability. And then the last one is veterans and families that include a veteran member that lives in the household, but they must also meet one of the other qualifying criteria. So quickly, I'll go through the 4 eligible activities. The first one is rental housing, which can be the acquisition, rehabilitation, or new construction of affordable rental housing that would need to be occupied by a qualifying household. Unlike the regular home program, which targets home-assisted rental units based on a tenant's income, 70% of all HOME-ARP units will be admitted to a rental housing project based only upon their status as a qualifying population household and not on their income. Project-based rental assistance for HOME-ARP units is encouraged by HUD to help cover project operating costs, with the assumption that the majority of the tenants who qualify as a qualifying population household are most likely extremely low income and would not be eligible to pay a huge amount of rent. A 15-year HOME-ARP required minimum term is required. The use of HOME-ARP funds to provide ongoing operating cost assistance or capitalize a project operating cost assistance reserve to address operating deficits, can't talk, of the HOME-ARP units is eligible, and that is to, like I said, assuming a tenant is extremely low income and only pays a certain amount towards rent, helping to fund an operating cost assistance would be able to offset so that a project can still operate fully. Underwriting guidelines and subsidy layering are required, and all costs associated with the project are required to be considered necessary and reasonable. The different types of eligible housing is manufactured housing, SRO, single room occupancy, permanent supportive housing. For this particular activity, emergency shelters, hotels, motels, nursing homes, etc., are not eligible. And just for perspective, average total cost per unit for regular home applications that we've received in December 2021 is $680,000 per unit. So based on those assumptions, you're looking at 15 to 20 HOME-ARP units for the full grant amount. Okay, next is Tbra, tenant-based rental assistance. And HOME-ARP Tbra would assist qualifying population households for housing-related costs. It can be provided to cover the entire cost or an insufficient amount that the household can't pay. For rental units, home buyer is ineligible. The assistance is attached to the household and not to a particular rental unit. So a household could move from one unit to another and the assistance could continue as long as the new unit is found to be meet applicable property standards, that it's a healthy and safe place for someone to live in. Eligible costs include rental assistance, security deposit payments, and utility payments, as long as they're part of already paying rental assistance or security deposit payments. Next is HOME-ARP supportive services, and HOME-ARP funds may be used to provide a broad range of supportive services, including the service categories that are eligible are all the McKinney-Vento eligible service categories, homeless prevention, which is adapted from the ESG Emergency Solution Grant regulations, as well as housing counseling. every single individual or household that is served with these supportive services would need to qualify as a qualifying population. It could be a separate activity or in combination with another HOME-ARP activity. As an example, you could use HOME-ARP funds for supportive services in a HOME-ARP rental unit. No duplication of services is not allowed. So if they're already receiving services through another program, they would not be eligible through the HOME-ARP program. McKinney-Vento activities include a whole range of services. Anyway, childcare, education services, employment assistance, job training, food, housing search, counseling services, legal services, life skills trainings, mental health, case management, transportation, etc. And then the last activity is Non-Congregate Shelter, NCS. And for purposes of this program, that is defined as a private unit or room for temporary shelter, serves individuals and families that meet one or more of the qualifying populations. And there's no requirement for an occupant to sign a lease or an occupancy agreement. Eligible activities include acquisition of a structure to be used as NCS where the property is found to be in standard condition, so there's no rehab that is required. New construction of a structure to be used as NCS, and that can include purchasing the land or a developer already owning the land. And then lastly, rehab of existing structures, hotels, motels, nursing homes to be used as an NCS. And with rehab, they would have to meet all applicable property standards. Eligible costs include acquisition costs, demolition costs, hard costs of development or construction, related soft costs, and replacement reserve. And NCS activity cannot pay for paying ongoing costs of operating the NCS, and cannot pay in the future if there was a plan to convert an NCS building to permanent rental housing. The terms that are required with the HOME-ARP NCS is for new construction, it would have to be remain occupied and operated as an NCS building for 15 years. And if it was acquisition and or rehab, it would need to be required to remain for 10 years. I did want to note that at this time, I know there has, I guess, been ongoing conversation at the national level on these NCS requirements that for now, a private room or unit in an NCS must have a private bathroom. Not a private kitchen, but a private bathroom. So that is something to note at this time. That's the rule. Let's see. So this is just a quick graphic on kind of DCD's planning process requirements for these funds. We need to summarize our consultation efforts as well as some sort of public participation process, which will include at least one Board of Supervisors meeting at a later date in 2022. We will need to document a needs assessment and gaps analysis, and within the allocation plan, identify HOME-ARP activities.
And Kristen, is this part of the public participation, this meeting right now?
So that's what we're doing now is on the next slide. We're required to do consultations with the local continuum of care, is the one right off the top. public housing authorities, other public agencies, and then the service providers that serve the qualifying population. So homeless service providers, fair housing providers, domestic violence, et cetera, et cetera. So this was our sort of starting point for required consultations to better understand the needs in this county and which eligible activities can be most impactful with the approximately $10 million. So another couple slides we'll be doing, I have a series of questions that I'll ask all of you to answer to help better formulate where all of you may be with your opinions on what is best for what we should do with these funds. So the needs assessment and gaps analysis, and this is right from the HUD regulations, is kind of looking at data in the county for sheltered and unsheltered homeless populations, currently housed populations that may be at risk of homelessness, other families requiring services or housing assistance to prevent homelessness, and who are at greatest risk of housing instability or may be in unstable housing situations. Okay, so I'm hoping this will work. We at the department, DCD, have used Poll Everywhere. So it's a live, when we get into it on each question, there will be, you'll be able to see in real time how your colleagues that are in this meeting answer one way or another. So there's 2 ways to do this. You can join on your computer by going to pollev.com, POLLEV.com. And when you're there, you can enter John K, JOHNK 706. Or you can use your phone and text John K, JOHNK 706 to the phone number 22333 on your cell phone to join.
Kristen, there's a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see it. The question is, do funds trigger David Bacon wage construction costs?
They do. I'm pretty sure they do for rental development. I think it's the same rule as the regular home funds. I put it in my notes. I will double check. I believe it is the same rules as the regular home program, where if there are 11 home or HOME-ARP units in a project, then you're exempt from paying federal prevailing wage Davis-Bacon. But if there's 12 or more, then yes, Davis-Bacon would apply. I'm not sure on development or construction of an NCS project. I'll have to look at that. I'm not sure. Thank you. I only have the one screen, so I haven't been able to manage the chat.
And just a quick temp check for people. It sounds like, are people having issues getting in, or are they able to get in? If anybody's having issues, you can unmute yourself or put in the chat, and we'll see what we can do. It sounds like people are able to log on. So you can either do it through your phone or through your computer. Okay, yes. People are in.
Okay, so, oh, looks like people have already answered the first question. So this first question, if I set it up properly, you can answer more than once.
It's asking for username.
Good question. So I think you can just put in your name if you want to.
I tried that. It didn't work.
Oh, so you do that and then you have to hit submit underneath it.
I think the username is that John K 706.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it's the John K, JOHNK, as in my department head's name, John Kopchak, 706. Okay,
Did that work for you, Irma?
Let me try it again.
Okay. And it's on the screen. If you forget at the very top of the screen that's showing, it should have the code for you.
And while we're waiting, if it's okay if I just say a couple of words, the home funds in our county, or Kristen, you can explain that that we all of the jurisdictions who are CDBG jurisdictions also receive home funds that we pool with the county, and the county acts as the administrator of those funds. So the county basically these are funds. Antioch, Pittsburgh, Concord, Walnut Creek, and the urban county funding that the county administers.
right. We operate as a what is called a home consortium, which is why the funds can be used anywhere in the county. Okay, so has everyone had a chance to answer this question? The numbers are still, the percentages are still moving, which is great. All right, I'm going to move on. So the next question is, would you support the use of HOME-ARP funds for production or preservation of permanent affordable rental housing? Okay. I don't see the percentages going up or down anymore, so I'm going to move on to the next question. Let me know if I'm going too fast and not everyone has had an opportunity to answer the question. Okay. Seeing and hearing none. Next question is, would you support the use of HOME-ARP funds for a non-congregate shelter project or an NCS project?
I just want to pause for a minute and see if people have questions about what this means. This is not like necessarily a familiar term for a lot of folks. So is the idea like this is sort of like purchasing a hotel like the Motel 6 that's now become a non-congregate shelter?
Yeah, so I liken it to the state's Project Home Key program, where you can purchase an existing hotel or motel, and if it doesn't need any rehab and it meets property standards and is ready to operate as a NCS, great, that's eligible. If it needs some rehab, that's also eligible. Or if there's property out there that would allow for new construction of a new NCS shelter, that's also eligible.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you. I thought I knew that's what it meant, but I wanted to make sure.
Get it. There's a lot of terms and acronyms. Okay. I'll move on. Doesn't percentages seem to have stopped moving, so we'll go on to the next one. Oh, did I? No. What? Do you think there is a need for TBRA, tenant-based rental assistance, in Contra Costa County? I didn't say this in my presentation, but my sort of thought on this is that this is not maybe not the best use of the HOME-ARP funds, only because there isn't a whole lot of vacant rental units on the market in Contra Costa County and in the Bay Area, because this is a tenant-based rental assistance program. It's you're giving the rental assistance to the tenant, and then they have to go out and find a unit to rent.
And
So-
two questions. One is folks are reporting that in our program, this question has not come up.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was just looking, I'm like, I'm not getting any answers. What happened?
The other question I had is, remind me, are services attached with this or not? Is it just rent, or is it like permanent supportive housing where there's services plus rental assistance?
Services are not required, but could be.
Okay.
You could partner a TBRA program with the HOME-ARP supportive services program, but I need to figure out why this question isn't working.
Got it.
Let's see here. Why? I don't know why it's not working. Well, I guess what I will ask people to put their answers in the chat, if that works for people. And
I love it
hopefully the rest of the questions work.
Technology.
Yeah, I love it. Or if you want to unmute yourself, you can do that too.
If folks don't want their votes public, can they just directly send it to you
That's fine.
in chat? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so I will move on to the next one and hopefully, oh, I gotta go back through. Yeah. Okay, so still not working.
Now it showed up actually once you click to the
Yeah.
A and B. So go back one.
Oh, look
There
at
we go.
that.
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Yay, technology.
Except for now on my screen, it's showing the next question.
Yep.
Oh, it is on my
Yeah.
screen.
Oh, that's funny.
There you
Okay.
go. It's
Yep.
back now.
So
Okay,
now
well, I'm looking at the NCS question, but that's fine.
the NTS is showing up on my program screen, not this one. So
Okay.
maybe go forward one. Okay,
Yeah.
there we go. So stop there. Technology, but it's working.
Okay, did everyone get a chance to answer?
I am not seeing anything to the contrary in the chat. So I think you're
Okay,
good.
I'm gonna go on to the next one.
Okay, and it did advance on my gadget.
Okay, So you knew that I wasn't just going to ask you the easy questions. I'm also going to ask you the difficult question of rate the following eligible activities in order of need, with 1 being the greatest need and 4 being the least needed. And so the 4 eligible activities are listed here. I don't see okay. I was going to say, I don't see it changing, but there it goes.
Kristen, with the permanent affordable rental housing, are you saying that's permanent supportive housing or just affordable?
It can be both.
So it can either, so it's
And-
support services or non-support services.
Right.
Okay.
And can you define affordable for the purposes of this? Is it for like extremely low, very low income, or that this broad bucket of affordable?
So for the HOME-ARP program, 70% of an entire project can be a HOME-ARP unit, which is not based upon their income at all. It is just based upon them meeting a
Okay.
qualifying population. And then the remaining, not more than 30% of a total rental unit assisted with HOME-ARP can be restricted as a low income unit, which is for purposes of this program, 80% of area median income. And they don't have to be occupied by a qualifying population household.
And just to clarify, somebody's asking, how do you vote on this one? I think you drag your top choice. Like, I think you move your options into the order that you want them on your screen. Is that correct?
I believe so.
On behalf of people texting, they're telling us we need to say A, B, C, or D, I think. And I'm not sure which one is which.
Oh, okay. Let's see what the instruction.
Oh, I see. If you're doing it on your phone, if you tap it twice, it'll give you arrows up and down. Like if you've gone to the website, you tap it twice for arrows up and down.
Yeah. No, I don't know where that came from. I thought I was being clever with this one, but maybe on the texting it doesn't work. Let's see here. Or not. Let's see what the instructions say here.
There may not be that many of us texting, so it's not a big deal. Happy to reply in
Okay.
Or here, I'll just voice. For us, I feel like I see a potential funding for everything but the non-congregate shelter in my city. And so that's, to me, that's the #1 priority for the non-congregate shelter, but the rest are equally important.
Okay. Thank you. I have to get. So I guess I'll have to look at the responses after the fact, because I don't know if what's here is what was there before, if these are the answers. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question, which is rate the following HOME-ARP qualifying populations in order of need, to kind of help us. And I also fully understand that all of these are the greatest need, but I have to ask the difficult questions, unfortunately.
Can you just define the difference between at greatest risk of housing instability versus at risk of homelessness?
In my opinion, they're very similar.
Mhm. I mean, I think the at risk of homelessness under McKinney-Vento is within 2 weeks of losing your housing, but I wasn't sure.
So greatest risk of housing instability means a household that is extremely low income,
Mhm.
less than 30% AMI, and is experiencing a severe cost burden, paying more than 50% of their monthly income
Mhm.
towards housing costs,
Mhm.
which, in my opinion, if they meet that test, they most likely also meet the test of at risk of homelessness. But maybe not.
And this question is specifically about populations that should be prioritized with this funding source, not in general.
Correct. Okay. So the next question is, in your opinion, how difficult is it to get into a shelter, a homeless shelter in Contra Costa County?
And hold on, I just want to pause for 1 second because there's a few questions in the chat that I'm seeing. So
Oh.
Kiva, for some reason, your question, are you doing it by the text version? Is it not coming through for you? That last question didn't come to her.
Yes, I'm doing it by the text, and I didn't get the last question.
Okay.
Didn't come through for me.
For folks that are doing it by text, I wonder, given that there's some glitches, if you have the capacity on your phone to just go to poll.ev on your browser on your phone, is that possible? Or if you don't have a smartphone, then I guess you'll need to use the text function.
Actually, the text took me to that browser.
Oh, weird.
So when I hit submit,
Mhm.
it made all the questions blue, all the answers blue, but it didn't move on to the next question. And that's for the one that said rate the following eligible activities in order. So that's where I'm stuck.
Oh, so you can't get to any of the additional questions.
No. Actually, don't worry about me. I'm gonna have to get off early anyway, so don't worry about it. I'm honored to have participated this far, but I have to get off early anyway for a medical appointment. So I'll see you guys later.
Thank you.
Thank
Kia.
you.
Thank you.
There's another question in the chat, Kristen. So in this case, this is for the last question. Does family mean family with minor children, or the HUD meaning which also can be an individual adult?
On the,
The previous question.
it can be a household with the second answer. A household serving an adult.
With
Is that
an
what you
adult
said?
home.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Has everyone had a chance to answer this question? Hearing none. Hopefully these next questions work. So this is you type in your answer. Keep it, I will say, keep it somewhat short and or concise, and then they will, as you answer, will pop up on the screen. I'm trying to remember with texting, if it's more than one word, you might have to put a period in between each word. I can't remember.
And can you just really quickly do a explanation of non-congregate shelter? Because I forget.
Yeah, so non-congregate shelter is similar to Project Home Key from the state of California. And it is a Going back to my page here. Private unit or room for temporary shelter. And at this time, HUD is defining that it is required to have a private bathroom. And it will need to serve individuals and or families that meet one or more of the qualifying populations. And it does not require an occupant to sign a lease or an occupancy agreement.
So Joe, one way to think about it is a congregate shelter would be like the Concord shelter or Brookside, where there's a bunch of people in one kind of open building. And non-congregate is like Delta Landing that's just opened, where it's basically a converted hotel where there's essentially like 1 or 2 people in a room with their own bathroom. So it's the congregate part is like everyone's together if it's congregate, and non-congregate means they're a little more separated. Does that help define it a little better for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, so they have their own private space. So I just have one more question after this one, but it looks like there's still answers coming through here. So I will give it another minute or two to leave opportunity for questions and answers. Okay, so in the interest of time, because I think what I'm seeing on the screen is a little bit of a delay of what people have had the opportunity to answer. I will move on to the last question, which is a similar question of what needs or gaps do you see in permanent affordable rental and or permanent supportive rental housing in Contra Costa County? So I will clarify when I'm talking about permanent affordable rental housing, I am generally speaking about rental housing that has been developed and is managed by, a nonprofit affordable housing developer, that their mission is to build affordable rental housing. Okay, has everyone had a chance to answer this question? Not hearing anything. So this was the last of the poll EV. And so I will leave this up for now in case there's more questions that come through, but I am happy to take any additional questions either in the, I haven't looked at the chat because like I said, I only have the one screen. Or if people want to unmute themselves and ask directly.
Can you remind us what the next, like what happens with this information and what the next steps are?
So the next steps are, depending on, I haven't looked at the participant list from this meeting today, but it looks like we got a decent turnout, which is great. We will probably be reaching out directly to some of the other service providers that serve the different qualifying populations in Contra Costa County to continue the required consultation process. And then we'll be holding or presenting, discussing at the Board of Supervisors meeting for public participation on what eligible activities we are proposing to HUD to use with these funds, and then ultimately the allocation plan gets submitted to HUD, the Housing and Urban Development, as part of the process, and then depending on what the county proposes, we'll go from there.
Great. And so Chris, I don't know if that answers your question. Chris had asked, will there be a NOFA or something else to determine the allocation of these funds?
Yes, there will be some sort of, I think with any or all of the eligible activities that we can choose from, there will be some sort of NOFA process for either, affordable housing rental development or acquisition rehab development of non-congregate shelter, and or some sort of NOFA RFQ process for supportive services or tenant-based rental assistance. So I'm just my last slide is just my contact information if anyone wants to follow up with me directly on these funds or any other questions. Like I said, I'm a senior housing planner for Department of Conservation and Development. My email is there, kristen.shirk@dcd.cccounty.us. And my direct line is 925-655-2889. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you. Oh, it's Kristen with an I. Story of my life.
Sorry, my name's always misspelled. So ignore what I just put in the chat. Kristen, why don't you put it in? Just so.
I'll put it in there.
Sorry.
It's okay. And like I said, story of my life. Now watch me spell it wrong.
Right. Are there other questions that folks have for Kristen? The other thing to know is, like, as more public input opportunities come up, we will definitely be pushing that out through our CoC channels and newsletters. So, so questions specifically related to this home funding process. Geeta, I see your hand up.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my call. The problem that I have is the competition and the way we run the business. In a real world, the world of money, that the competition is there because it's good for clients, it's good for corporations, it's innovation, it's all there is. How does government allow companies that they hire with taxpayers' money to compete for the business, not for the fundings, but for the business. Thank you.
I'm not sure I'm following what you mean by business. If you could clarify that so then I
Yeah.
can.
So let's
do
say
my
I have
best
a
to answer.
rental. Let's say I have a rental. And I have been proven to you that I have done a good job. Let's just say Shelter Inc. We all love Shelter Inc. They're there. They do a great job. What if there's only one Shelter Inc. in our country, in our county? One. What if it was one only place you could shop? There would not be Safeway and Whole Food. You just one place you could shop. They don't care anymore. There's no competition. But because now Safeway knows there's competition, they might lose business because some business can go to another grocery store. They compete, the prices. And so for the businesses in America, that's the way they do. They compete, they do a great job. I'm asking, how does government, when they are hiring people, like you give money for the businesses, so you're giving money to Safeway to come up with an idea. You're giving money to Shelter Inc. You're giving money to Jewish community centers, many of them, Contra Costa Housing Authority. How do you just want to use one, or do you use many other people that they compete for the same business? Do you know what I'm saying? If I'm not saying that, I'll just figure it out and I sent you an email. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I feel free to follow up. There will be a competition of sorts for any of these eligible activities through a competitive NOFA, notice of funding availability, or RFP, RFQ, requests for proposals, qualification process, where there is, in a sense, a competition. And let's say we're using these funds for affordable rental development housing. The department that I work for, DCD, has a long-standing competitive process through our regular home funds, as well as a couple other funding sources on an annual basis, where there is a competition of applications are received typically from nonprofit developers, where they typically already have a site in mind somewhere in Contra Costa County, and they've started or have completed a process with what a local jurisdiction for planning entitlements and building permit approvals for all the normal process, market or affordable, to build in Contra Costa County, and they need funding from us to help fill the financial gap to build the development.
Yeah, it's a good question, Agita. Sometimes funding just automatically comes to the county, but then the way that gets distributed out into the community happens through, as Kristen said, RFPs. And sometimes, like for the HUD NOFO funding, right, which you're now getting more familiar with, projects are competing kind of directly for that.
Right.
So, but there's pretty much always like a competition process for that money to get distributed, so that it doesn't always go just to one provider.
Correct.
But there is no competition between the businesses, which is benefit the client.
When you mean businesses, do you mean like the nonprofit service providers?
Yeah, excellent.
So that's actually what an
Excellent.
RFP process is, right? So there's like proposals that are put forward, and then there's usually like a review group that looks at them and scores them and decides which agency should get the money. So for the vast majority of the nonprofit providers in our community, they are competing for the funding that they have for their different programs, or making applications where they have to put forward very specific information about what qualifications their agencies have, what services they're providing, the quality of those services. Does that help explain it a little bit?
Yeah, that's thank you so much. That's completely clear, and I get that.
Mhm.
But when you hire me, let's say you decided I'm qualified, I'm the best. I'm not me. I mean, I'm not the XYZ. It's qualified, and you're going to give them the fundings, correct? But one person gets the funding. One person in the whole Contra Costa going to give the service. And that's where I have a problem with no competition, because that, if I am the only one get the money and I'm the only one in Contra Costa that I'm doing this job, so there's no competition between me and somebody else. I get the fundings, not the fundings, but competition directly. If I have a hotel and consumer has a choice to come to my hotel or next one hotel, how do you go about that? Is a competition among the funders for doing a better business. And I'll just leave it as that. I took too much
Okay,
time.
yeah, happy to
We'll
talk
just
more
come
offline.
back. We'll just come back to it again. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
I'm mindful of time, but I also want to know there's a question in the chat and a question in somebody has their hand raised. So I don't know if Kristen, if you can see the chat. So the question in the chat is, why are the public housing units in Pittsburgh, Richmond, Rodeo in such poor conditions? They have never been upgraded. I can guarantee no one would want to step foot in those units. And that may or may not be something we can sort of address in this moment, but wanted to
Yeah,
just
that
make
is
sure it's
that is
flagged.
definitely an important question that I don't necessarily have the answer for. I don't work for any of the housing authorities. But
just wanted to make sure the question was heard. And Sakira, happy to talk with you more. And that's, there's conversations to have with the housing authority of Contra Costa that manages those. And then there are a couple other, the housing authority of Pittsburgh as well.
yeah,
and
Pittsburgh
Brianne
and
has a
Richmond have their own
question.
housing authorities. Okay,
And
Brianne.
Brianne, you're still muted if you're trying to talk.
I apologize. It kept asking me to lower my hand. My interest is regarding partnering with your organization for the use of ARPA funds and HOME-ARP funds. I know there's a lot of, I didn't see how many local government leaders there are on the call today, but all of the local cities have their own ARPA funds, and I suspect we all have similar interests. Hi, Jamie, I see your face. We spoke a couple of months ago. How do we go about with parallel interests, kind of pooling our funds so that way we can all get to the same objective?
May I ask, Brianne, do you work for one of the cities or towns in the county? I apologize.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Oh, no problem. I'm a council member for the city of Martinez. And so pretty soon we'll be selecting our own ARPA funding. We'll be allocating it to various projects. And there's a lot of overlap with the conversation that we're having today. So we don't want to be spending all of our money on a project that you will also be spending money on. So how do these local jurisdictions coordinate with the county in order to get some of these housing related tasks accomplished?
We could certainly talk offline, or you could get me in contact with the housing staff at the city of Martinez. I am not necessarily familiar with all of the other ARPA funds that have been or will be distributed to the different local jurisdictions. I'm not necessarily familiar or know of another ARPA funding source that is specific for potential for housing development. There could be another one, but I'm not familiar with that. So if there is another ARPA funding source that is specific for potential for affordable housing rental development, I would love to know about it.
I will absolutely chat with you offline to clarify. The ARPA funding that at least is going to our city is open and can be used for anything. And so if our council members have identified housing as an issue, I think that's something we could probably spend our money on. And that was more the direction I was going with it.
Okay. Yeah, I would be happy to speak with any of the city's housing staff members. I know some of them, within the home consortium, we work pretty regularly with Antioch, Concord, Pittsburgh, and Walnut Creek staff, but not necessarily all of the other cities in the county. But I'm happy to have those conversations as needed.
Great, thanks for letting me chat a little bit.
You're welcome.
Awesome. So being mindful of time and that we have another piece we want to get to on the agenda, Kristen, I just want to thank you for your time. Are there any last things that you want to ask or say of this group while we're here?
I don't think so. I thank you for your time. Thank you for working with me on the technology quirks with using the pole EV system. Luckily with that system, I am able to go back and look at the answers that were given. And I'm most appreciative of your time for the last hour. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. We are now going to move into the second section of our agenda. So I'm going to turn it over to HOME-Based. I'll let you guys do an introduction of yourselves, and then we'll get moving. I wasn't sure who's speaking first in your team.
It's me. Hello. Thank you, everybody, for having us today. My name is Maddie Nation. I am a policy analyst with HOME-Based. HOME-Based is an organization dedicated to eradicating homelessness across the country, and we support the Contra Costa Continuum of care in lots of different ways. I'm sure you've met at least one person from our team if you've been involved with the CoC for a while. But today we are here to talk about the C4 Innovations Equity Assessment that was released last month. And then we're going to really focus in and dive in to creating meaningful partnerships with people with lived expertise. So this portion of the agenda will wrap up by 3 p.m. today. All right, so for our agenda, we have an activity. Then we are going to discuss what is equity. It's going to be real quick, just in case folks haven't heard that term before. Then we'll go into a little bit more detail about what was found in the C4 Innovations Assessment report, but we're going to keep it mostly high level for today. That report was sent out in advance if that's something you want to review, or you can also view it on the Contra Costa equity page, which we can pop in the chat in a bit here. And then finally, we're going to do breakout rooms, and we're going to talk about creating meaningful partnerships for people with lived expertise. Oh, geez. Activity, laying it on the line. So for this activity, we're going to be using the Zoom poll feature. So you don't need to go to any extra websites. It's just going to pop up on your screen. Each slide is going to give us a prompt and a scale. Your answers will be confidential, but they will not be anonymous. So what that means is that H3 and HOME-Based has the ability to access them after the meeting. We won't, but just to know that we do, if that's something that makes you feel uncomfortable. And you are welcome to skip any questions that are uninteresting to you or that you would prefer not to provide an answer to. So kind of for an example, are you ready to begin this activity? If you would answer 1, it would mean no. Please repeat the directions. If you answered 2, it would mean maybe. You think you've got it, but you've got a couple of clarifying questions. And then 3, yes, you're ready to go. I failed to put this example into the meeting, but if anybody has any questions, I'll give a 5-second pause. Please come off mute or pop in the chat before we get started. Okay, I'm not hearing any, so we're going to get started. I am familiar with racial equity as a term or concept. So I just launched the poll. It should be on your screen. 1 is disagree, 2, neither disagree or agree, and 3 is agree. No shame in not being familiar with equity. You can answer whatever fits you the best. I'm going to give it 10 more seconds.
Do we press?
Joe, I realized, Joe, I think it's because I have you as a co-host,
Okay,
so I'm
great.
going to remove co-host so you can do this.
There
I
it
just
is.
was realizing that.
Too much power, Joe, too much power.
Put me in, coach.
Okay, I'm going to end. I will share results. So in general, we've got lots of folks here today who are familiar with racial equity as a term or concept, which is amazing. I was not familiar with racial equity as a term or concept just a few years ago. So I'm happy to see that we have so many experts here today. And then we have two folks who neither disagree nor agree, which I think probably means you heard it, you don't have a strong definition of it. No fear, we will go over that in the next couple slides. All right. So we have our next question. When developing a response to homelessness, we need to center race. So I'm going to launch the poll. Give everybody about 30 seconds to complete it. Should we center race while responding to homelessness? My partner just whispered yes from the kitchen, so that we can add one on to yes. I'm going to give everybody about 5 more seconds to complete the poll. 2, 1. Hit submit if you haven't already. All right, so we definitely had a bit more of a spread on this one. We had a couple of folks who disagree with centering race as a response to homelessness, a couple of folks who are neutral, no opinion on this item, and then our majority, about 13 of us, agreed with this statement. When developing a response to homelessness, we should center race. So this is something we're going to talk about in more detail today, sort of race and its implications on homelessness, especially in Contra Costa County. All right, we are going to go to our second to last, laying it on the line. This question asks, when developing a response to homelessness, we need to center people with lived expertise of homelessness. So when developing our response, we should put people with the lived experience, people who have actually experienced homelessness, at the center of that response. Folks, about 20 seconds more to complete this response. Okay, 5 more seconds to complete the response. Okay, this one was a little bit less divisive than our last one. We had no one disagree with centering folks with lived expertise. We had 5 people who are neutral on this statement, and then the vast majority of folks, 20, agreed with the statement. When developing a response to homelessness, we need to center people with lived expertise. That is certainly going to be a focus of our conversation today. Going to take us to our last one. The diversity of decision makers should reflect the diversity of the communities they serve. So you can take diversity to mean whatever it typically means to you personally. Diversity is one of those fraught words. Everybody's got a different definition in their head of it. Gonna give it 15 seconds. You all are getting quicker at answering the polls. The numbers jump up faster. Okay. Great. So we had no one disagree with this statement. We had 1 person who was neutral, and then 22 out of 23, 96% of folks who respond to this poll agreed that the diversity of decision makers should reflect the diversity of the communities that they serve. So thank you everybody for participating in that little warm-up activity. As promised, we're now going to give just a super brief overview. What is equity? I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mark, to take over this section.
Awesome. Thank you, Maddie. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Mora. I work with Maddie at Homebase. I'm excited to see such a large group of folks who are excited and interested to advance equity in the continuum of care to support our unhoused neighbors. I'm going to be spending a little time, as Maddie said, talking about what equity is. I have the unenviable task of doing that in like 5 to 10 minutes. So I can't promise that we'll solve world peace, but you know, for a lot of folks, it seems, because according to the poll, 100% of you said you were comfortable, at least were familiar with the concepts around racial equity. So that's good to note. But even for us who maybe are completely comfortable with this, it doesn't hurt to to make sure that we revisit them from time to time. And of course, not all of us, as Maddie said, will have the exact same definition or ideas about equity or racial equity. So it'd be good to make sure that we can get on somewhat of the same page. And just to note that I'll be talking about equity in general, not necessarily racial equity, but equity as a broader concept. Next slide, please. So I don't know if you all have seen this graphic before. It's been circulating around the internet. I honestly don't know the source of it. So if anyone knows where it came from, was it like a bike advocacy coalition or something, please feel free to drop that information in the chat. I would love to cite them. But this is a common graphic that's used to explain the differences between equity and equality. So equity is about treating individuals fairly based on their needs. Here we have at the top of the graphic, equality is more about giving people the same thing regardless of what their needs are or starting point. So we see folks with different abilities, different body types, yet they all get the same size bike. Not everybody's going to be able to ride that bike and get to where they need to go. Equity takes into account that people have different needs, and it's about getting people what they need, and also addressing that there are differences and barriers to participation, even historic ones. And I'll just say a quick note about that. I mean, a common example of a historic barrier that folks may know of in the housing or homelessness space is redlining. Redlining now gets used to kind of generally describe all types of housing discrimination, both past and current, that prevents people of color, particularly Black residents, from being able to own homes. But specifically, redlining referred to what the federal government did in the 1930s to draw red lines, like physically draw red lines on color-coded maps around predominantly Black neighborhoods to essentially deem them hazardous or otherwise unworthy of receiving government-sponsored loan or mortgage assistance, which basically had an impact, right, over the years on who could own homes and who could build generational wealth. And those impacts are still being felt today in terms of the racial segregation we still see apparent in many neighborhoods and schools across the country. And so if we're talking about equity, taking an equitable approach to that particular historic fact is asking ourselves, what does it mean to recognize and address this when we're designing programs and resources and outreach and making sure that, quote unquote, everybody gets what they need, right? So yeah, just keep that in mind as we're having this conversation. Obviously, racial equity is like a specific subset under the broader equity umbrella, and there are a lot of other ways that you can look at equity. But today we'll be looking at racial equity and also equity in terms of making sure that people with lived experience of homelessness are impacting and having meaningful input on decisions. So go ahead and go to the next slide. And I see, thank you, Jamie, for defining generational wealth. Means families gathering money assets that can be passed down, for sure. And just highlighting a couple things, Jamie's going to talk in a minute about the racial equity report and some information that was provided in the report about equity in the CoC or the continuum of care. But here we're just highlighting two things that were brought out by that assessment. So one is that Black and Indigenous individuals are overrepresented among individuals experiencing homelessness in the CoC. And another is that Black consumers return to homelessness at a higher rate than any other racial group. These are statistics, facts from the Contra Costa CoC. So while the equity report does well to point out these disparities, but now the work of the CoC is to figure out, well, one, why is this the case? And then two, what can we do to address this? And that's part of why we're having this conversation, is to kind of kickstart the conversations around equity so that we can do the hard and necessary work to figure out how the CoC can effectively respond to these disparities. And ultimately, the question is, what does it mean to give disproportionately impacted communities what they need, right? Going back to that slide of getting people what they need, regardless of where they started. Okay, I think any questions? I know that was like super quick, and I'm sure for most people that was like, cool, thank you for telling me stuff I already knew, which is great if you already knew it. But anything stand out? You can take like 30 seconds to take any comments or questions. Okay, hopefully folks are feeling good as we continue to move. I'm gonna pass the baton, as it were, over to the awesome Jamie to cover the C4 Innovations Equity Assessment Report.
Thank you, Mark. Let's go to the next slide. So we're gonna ask a few questions and I wanna do just sort of a temperature check. So some of you may be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Did you attend the January 14th C4 Innovations Racial Equity Report briefing? And if you have zero idea what I'm talking about, either you were extra sleepy that day and you went, or you did not go. Either one is equally possible in my world. Okay, so it looks like about half-ish were there and half-ish were not there. Okay, next slide. I'm just gonna drop this down so I can see what I'm doing. So for those of you that were there, hopefully this is a review. For those of you that were not there, the 30,000 foot picture is we hired an outside technical consultant to do essentially an assessment of our homeless system of care through the lens of equity, to just look at a bunch of different pieces of our system with an equity lens. And the purpose was to help us identify what we were maybe already doing well and could amplify, and where we maybe need to do a better job. And the results were broken down into kind of like 5 buckets with 51 separate findings and recommendations. So those 5 buckets I'm just going to touch on really quickly. So the first one, that green one, data processes and quantitative data. So that means like the data that goes into our system where we can then spit out like numbers. Like we saw X number of people that thought, you know, core outreach touched X number of people. Or looking at how some of the processes are working for getting that data into our system. So HMIS is like our big database where we capture all the data of all the people that our system sees. So there was a deep dive into that. Qualitative data is used to describe data that's often like stories, or like Kristen today got some quantitative data, right? We did like those surveys, but there's also qualitative data that maybe she's pulling out in the chat, right? So people's comments, or if there's like a focus group or a listening session where you're having more of a conversation rather than like just filling out a survey. Policies and procedures. So this is like sort of how things are set up and what happens if things aren't working. So what are the policies and procedures for how programs are supposed to run, or how a process is supposed to go? And that can include how people are supposed to have access to different things. Coordinated entry processes was like its own special thing. So coordinated entry is essentially the process by which folks sort of hit the front door of our system of care and then get connected, especially to housing resources. So there's like a whole deep dive in that. And then the last bucket was looking at how we're doing as a whole system around partnerships with people with lived expertise. So there's a bunch of things, and like some folks want to go like super in the nitty gritty, so we included the whole report. I'll say we're just beginning to have conversations about this. We just got the report a couple of weeks ago. So if you can go to the next slide, I'll give you an example of like a finding and the recommendation. So basically the finding is, hey, we looked at this thing in your system and this is what we saw. And maybe this is where we saw like a challenge or an opportunity for improvement. And then the recommendation is what the technical assistance folks think we could do to actually do it better. So for example, they said, it looks like you need to strengthen, okay, I'm gonna read it, it's very technical. Need to strengthen infrastructure to authentically engage people with lived experience. To me, that translates to, we need to do a better job building up our ability to have real relationships and conversations with people that have lived experience, and bringing folks with lived experience to the table where the power is shared. The recommendation for how to do that better is to get more funding and staffing for a staff person to actually support people to be able to participate and lower some of the barriers that might get in the way. Thank you, Joe. So we're acronym soup. We use a lot of acronyms, right? A lot of like letters to stand for words. So PWLE is what was used in that report, but I'm going to give you a little teaser. We're going to talk more about this kind of language in particular and get your input on how we want to refer to folks that have experienced homelessness. Next slide. So we've gotten this report, and we have now brought that report to the Council on Homelessness. And so there's some next steps that are happening. So H3, so that's who I work for, the County Health Department. We're working directly with that technical assistance provider. And part of what we're doing is behind the scenes, we are taking a lot of the recommendations and we're trying to populate a document. So we're basically trying to map out what all those recommendations are and what's actually already happening so that we then have a starting place for making decisions about where to start. Because we can't do all the things, we can't do all 51 things right away. The council recognized that. And so part of what they just did, the Council on Homelessness at our last meeting on the 3rd said, hey, let's form a temporary, time-limited racial equity working group. So there's a group of people that are now designated or have been identified to start to really think about this and help come up with a plan for the next step. So not like the plan about how we're magically going to fix equity and improve it, but basically, how should we be thinking about all of this stuff and building some structures so that we can move this forward. We have some existing committees where a lot of this work is already maybe started or is happening. And so that's part of what we're trying to map right now is like, okay, who's already kind of doing some stuff on equity that may track with some of these recommendations. And so you may, part of what I want to flag here too is like, there may be places where you want to plug in if you're interested in this. We also are working with a number of technical assistance providers right now. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with the PATH committee, PATH, Plan for Accelerating Transformative Housing Innovations. That's one of the council committees where we have technical assistance providers that are helping support that work. And there's a lot of equity is really woven into a lot of the work that they're doing. I don't know if there's anything, I'm trying to remember actually, honestly, I don't have the slides with the notes in front of me, so I can't remember if there was anything else for technical assistance providers to mention.
Yeah, the only other note for technical assistance providers is it's us and a couple other groups, and we've all reviewed this report in detail, and we're working to infuse that into our ongoing work. So things like coordinated entry, policies and procedures are part of it. These new written standards, which we've had a couple community meetings about, are part of that. So we are all trying, that's the meaning of the graphic actually. We're all trying to get on the same kind of track and following some of these racial equity recommendations in work that's ongoing.
Thank you, Maddie. I was like, there's something else, I'm sure. And then the last thing I wanted to flag is I'm going to put this in the chat right now. So one of the things that I do is send out about 90 kajillion emails. And part of how I make decisions about who gets which email is people have told me what kinds of things they're interested in. So we now have a new code sort of as a mailing list, which is information, and I'll put this in the chat, information:equity. So if you go to the link, there's a sign up and you may already have signed up on our mailing list, but you can just put in your name and email again, and it'll track it to your existing record. And if you want to keep getting more information about the equity work specifically, and like the equity working group and that sort of stuff, just tag and say you're interested in information, the information quote equity list, and we'll make sure that you're getting that. So like the thumbnail sketch is, there's a train that's leaving the station that's about to do a bunch of work on this. And there are a lot of places and for you to grab on and get on the train and get more involved in this. I can't remember if I have another slide.
Nope.
Nope. Now back to you at the station.
Okay, great. We are going to move into setting up our breakout rooms, which are going to be focused on creating meaningful partnerships with people with lived expertise, that PWLE acronym. So if you are here, we want everybody to stay. We want everybody to participate in the breakout rooms, but we totally understand breakout rooms are a lot to ask right now with everything that is happening around COVID and Omicron and ongoing staff shortages and all sorts of different bits and bobs. So if you are a person who's just listening in, does not want to participate in a breakout room, you can stay and you will not be forced to participate in a breakout room, but you are also welcome to leave. So for our discussion today, like we said, we are going to be focusing on partnerships with people with lived expertise and why. The first reason why we need this infrastructure to help guide the implementation of our other recommendations. We know that folks who are closest to the issue, folks who have experienced the issue, have the most unique insights to provide on this sort of topic. And we need good ways to engage those folks in more meaningful ways so that we can build out the infrastructure needed to implement all 51 of those recommendations. This is also an area without clear alignment within our current continuum of care structure. So like Jamie just talked about, there's lots of places where we can plug in ongoing work. We have many committees. We have the Council on Homelessness providing leadership. We're also going to have this racial equity working group. We have many TA or technical assistance providers doing all different sorts of work. But this topic specifically of partnerships with people with lived expertise is not held by one group, one body, one person leading this sort of effort. So we are in the phases of trying to figure out where this work nestles in within the larger structure. And we wanted to kick off some of those conversations today with your input. And then finally, we've made some improvements over the past year, but we have a lot more that needs to be done to create these meaningful partnerships. Part of what Jamie talked about is really mapping out what we've done around all of these efforts. And it's clear that there have been big strides to trying to engage folks and trying to make things more accessible, but we clearly are not at an end goal here at all with this topic. So we want more feedback and more ways to move this work forward. So we've got a quick question here. Do folks have lived experience of homelessness? And then if you do have lived experience of homelessness, what is your racial identity? So I am going to launch this poll. Each question also has a I prefer not to respond answer if that's something that calls to you. And the first question about lived experience is going to be single choice, whereas the racial identity question is multiple choice. So you can select as many as apply. And you can scroll down using your two fingers if you're on a Mac or your little scroll button if you hover over the thing if you've got a mouse. So I'll give folks a couple seconds to complete that poll. I'm going to give folks 10 more seconds to complete the poll. All right, so I'm going to share results on screen. You should still be able to scroll through here. So when we look at who has personal lived experience of homelessness, we have 4 folks here today who have personal lived experience of homelessness, and then 17 folks who do not. So as we're moving forward through this conversation, we're really going to ask that folks keep in mind the power differential and keep in mind stepping up and stepping back. If you identify as a person with lived experience, we want you to step up in this conversation as much as you can, as much as makes you feel comfortable. And if you are a person that does not have that lived experience, we hope that you save some space on the floor for those folks with lived experience to chime in first today. And then we have some, in terms of racial diversity, obviously we had a smaller number of folks who have lived experience of homelessness here, and people having racial identities all across the board. So appreciate everybody participating in that poll. I want to acknowledge we have fewer folks with lived experience than we had initially planned for. So I'm putting that out there as part of our facilitation notes. That is something that I am noticing. So engaging folks with lived experience of homelessness, as I've already said, the people with the direct experiences have the best understanding of the problem and the solution, as we've heard from many folks who work in Contra Costa and are advocates for this population and have experienced homelessness themselves. Nothing about us without us is kind of our motto for engaging folks with lived experience. So we are going to move into 3 breakout rooms. You're going to be able to pick the breakout room you would like to participate in, and I will explain in a second how you'll do that over Zoom. There's going to be 2 facilitators in each room, 1 facilitator with lived experience and 1 facilitator from either H3 or Home-Based. We're going to be in breakout rooms for about 17 minutes, I think, given some of our delays. Our facilitators are going to use Jamboard to take notes real time. And we're going to come back for an extremely brief report out after we are done with the breakout rooms. We have a couple of suggested activity norms, and I had some notes that I wanted to say here. So our first one, we have a common goal. So we're all here to work toward the common goal of ending homelessness. The conversations we're going to tackle with some of these different breakout rooms may be challenging and bring up differences of opinion, but we're all working on the same team, all trying to end homelessness together. So try to keep that in mind if the conversations get a little tense for you personally. We encourage you to notice the power dynamics in the room and be aware of how you're using your privilege. So like we already talked about, from taking up too much meeting time with your interests that may already be represented by the status quo or by the way things typically are, or using too much coded language that may be confusing to folks who haven't participated in this type of meeting before. As possible, we encourage everyone to spell out their acronyms, call out when they don't understand an acronym that someone else has used, try to avoid using the acronyms and the jargon as much as possible. And explain your points in ways that don't assume a wealth of previous knowledge in this space. Questions, whether you're new to this sort of topic, this is your 20th meeting on this exact same topic, we encourage you to ask any questions as they come up, either in the chat or out loud in your breakout room. We've done our best to present this information in an accessible way. We're going to provide context in each of the breakout rooms, but we rely on you to let us know when we've assumed something that we shouldn't have or something's unclear. And then finally, show up how you can today. The topics that we can cover can be extremely hard, especially for our folks with lived experience. There's this added depth of these topics being extremely personal as well, and very difficult to manage when people disagree with you, because it can feel like an attack on your person. So just take the breaks that you need, be kind to yourselves as we move through. Maybe that means for you today, you don't participate in this breakout room. Maybe it means you turn off video and you just listen in. Maybe it means you take a break in the middle. Just let us know. You can also always type "be right back" in the chat so we don't accidentally call on you and there's no awkward feelings. And our team is also always happy to debrief with anybody that needs it after today's call, whether you have questions, you just want to express frustration with the way a conversation went. We definitely want to hear that. We debrief our own calls internally all the time, and sometimes those are the things that help us get over the hump, or like the most challenging pieces that were previously difficult to move through. Those are our suggested activity norms for today. And so here is the slide where I explain how we are going to join the breakout rooms. So our 3 options are on the left. So each breakout room is going to cover a different topic. The first one is stepping up and stepping back, sharing decision-making power. The second is going to be about compensation structures for people with lived expertise. And the third is about the importance of naming. How should we refer to this work? So you're going to be able to pick which of those breakout rooms you want to participate in, and I'm going to open them up in 1 minute. And the way you do that is on your bottom bar where you've muted and unmuted or stopped or started your video. Something's going to pop up that looks like this thing next to step 1 that says breakout room with a little icon. And then our step 2, you're going to pick the one that you want to join by clicking one of these blue buttons. But I am here to help anybody get into breakout rooms if they cannot figure out how to do it. And if folks don't want to participate in a breakout room, that is fine. I'll be in the main room the entire time as well. So I'm going to go ahead and open up all of the rooms and let people pick the ones that make the most sense to them. If you're having trouble doing it, you can just shout out. Anybody having any trouble? I could help you out. Anybody left that needs any assistance jumping into a breakout room? Hi folks, welcome back. We have about 25 seconds until all of the breakout rooms close and force everybody back. So do what you will with the 20 seconds. All right, I think our breakout rooms are closed. So we're going to do a speedy fast share out, just 1 or 2 interesting points or questions that came up as part of your breakout rooms. I'm going to ask our facilitators to share these interesting points. If our participants had additional things they want to say, please pop them in the chat. So we'll start with Lauren and Mark. Any interesting 1 or 2 interesting points or questions from your breakout room?
Lauren, do you want to take that or you want me to go?
Oh, Lauren, if you're talking, you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you.
No problem.
So for stepping back, stepping up and stepping back, the CoC, I think, really needs to view this as an opportunity not only to get input from individuals with lived experience, but use it as an opportunity for development for those individuals as well. I took those 2 years while I was on that project working with workforce development to take advantage of the leadership opportunities that were there, to level up some skills, overcome some phobias, especially phobias of talking to white people. My hands would shake so bad during the first workshops that I was facilitating, I couldn't type. But get that space, it was safe. I got to work through that stuff. And now I'm talking, and sometimes I talk too much. So I'll pass it back over to Mark.
No, I think that was perfect. And I just want to acknowledge apologies to everyone. I know in our room, we just got started and then we had to end. So we were running a little behind, but appreciate everyone's thoughts and comments.
Yeah, I think Wayne and Joe also echo your thoughts in the chat. Not enough time in the breakout rooms. So we'll plan more time next time. Our second breakout room focused on compensation. Joe or Jamie, do you want to take this one?
I can't access our answers, the Jamboard. I can't look at them, so I don't remember what we had a good conversation though about compensation.
Having audio issues. Hold on. Come back to us, please.
Okay, group 3, Michelle and Juno. Anything you want to share out?
Yeah, well, we also, we fell this too short, yada yada yada, but we did get some good stuff done. We're able to identify sort of 3 different terms. I think it was 3, looking at the notes, that we felt were examples of namings that we had issues with and had a unique feeling that we described as sort of rough draft, but like monolithic in a way. And that's a negative trait. And so we were able to identify that feeling, and like we could steer like further discussions in a way that involves having that, knowing that's there, identifying that. And what else did we talk about? For question 2, we did, we specifically decided to talk a little bit about PWLE because we use it today as an acronym in our discussion about acronyms. And so we talked about that a little bit. We identified that every system has its own acronyms, and it's really important to spell it out so everybody can participate until we get all on the same page on the way we're using acronyms and abbreviations. And I think that's probably good for time.
Great, thank you for sharing. And then Joe or Jamie?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So one of the things we talked about was like, in terms of compensation, how would people want to get paid? And, you know, would it be a check? Would it be a direct bank deposit? Would it be a gift card? And it sounded like actually having some flexibility is really important, because people may need different things at different times, or, you know, they may not have access to a bank account for a paper check or a mailing address, but you also may not want to get just gift cards because you have bills to pay. So having some flexibility around that was a big one. And then in terms of supporting people, technology was a big one. So figuring out how to support people with their technology, including things like charging stations, or making sure that facilities where people are seeking services have ways to make these meetings accessible. So maybe there's computers where people can actually like log into these kinds of meetings, for example. I think, oh, and the last question, which I think is really important, is like, if we don't have enough funding right now to support people's engagement, do we still ask them? Like, is it basically rude to ask people to participate without having funding? And so do we just wait? And the idea was like, ask now and be upfront about the fact that we're working on this, and then look at maybe if there's a way to back pay people once we get that worked out, which I thought was an interesting idea I hadn't thought about.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing those. There is a question in the chat that I believe is for group 1. How can I find out more about the workforce development program mentioned in my breakout room? Does anybody have information?
Yeah, let me put my email address in the chat and you can hit me up there and I will send you some data and an invite to a meeting that you might be quite interested in.
Amazing. Okay, so we are almost 5 minutes after time, recognizing that those breakout groups were not long enough. There are many more steps to engage with this work in the coming months, in the coming years. This is really just another opportunity to all come together to talk about it, but it will not be the last chance. So we would encourage you, if you're interested in attending more meetings like this, to sign up for that information equity mailing list that Jamie had mentioned earlier. I put the link in here. The link has been in the chat. The link will also be in the follow-up email. So definitely sign up for that mailing list if you want to continue this work. This Council on Homelessness Equity Working Group is going to start meeting soon and talking about the report broadly, which also includes this focus on meaningful partnerships. So keep your eyes open for that meeting announcement that should be coming out pretty soon here. And then finally, there is a full equity page on the H3 website now that includes the full text of the equity report. It includes another report specifically about partnerships with folks with lived experience. And then it also has another great report done by the Contra Costa, or by the real cohort through Bar High, which is another just like alphabet soup sort of situation, but was a group of folks who came together to talk about the intersections of racial equity and lived experience leadership. And continue to uplift that work. So there's definitely lots of resources to work with, and now we're working on implementing all the recommendations and thinking about what it looks like on the ground. So really appreciate everybody making time today. If you have additional questions, we'll stick around for a couple extra minutes to answer any of them, but otherwise we'll let you get on with your days. So thank you so much to everybody. Thank you especially to all of our facilitators of the breakout rooms as well.
Thanks, you guys. That was great. I have to run to my next meeting, but this was fantastic.
Thank you. Anybody sticking around to ask any questions?
I just wanted to jump. I just dropped a couple of things about the real cohort, the huge thing, and then session 6. That's all.
Amazing. Well, I'll make sure they get in the follow-up email. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Good meeting. See you all later.
Yeah. Bye. Jessica, are you sticking around with any questions or?
No, sorry. I'm just going to log off. Thank you. Thank you, Maddie.
No worries, dear. Have a good day. Bye.